The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days straight, and neither had the ache in Vespera's feet. She wiped down table 6 with the same rag she'd used all morning, watching the clock above the counter tick toward the end of her shift. The diner was almost empty, just an old trucker nursing his third refill, and a man in a grey coat sitting alone in the back booth, the one nobody liked because the heater vent above it rattled like a dying engine. She'd clocked him the second he walked in. Not because he was handsome, though he was, in a sharp, controlled sort of way. It was the way he moved. Careful. Like every step was measured before his foot even left the ground. He'd picked the booth farthest from the window. He'd sat facing the door. "Black coffee," he'd said, not looking up from his phone. "Nothing else." She'd brought it. He'd barely touched it. Now, 40 minutes later, he stood, dropped a folded bill on the table, and walked out without a word. No goodbye, no smile. Just the bell above the door jingling once as it swung shut behind him. Vespera sighed and picked up the bill. Exact change, not a cent more. "Cheap bastard," she muttered, sliding the coffee cup and saucer off the table. And that was when she noticed the plate wasn't sitting right, tilted slightly, like something was wedged underneath it. She lifted it. A set of car keys, a small black device that looked like a GPS unit, the rugged kind you'd see clipped to a hiker's backpack, already blinking a soft green light. And a note, folded into a tight, precise square, the kind of fold that took practice. Her hands went still. She glanced toward the door. The parking lot outside was empty except for her rusted Civic and the trucker's rig. The man in the grey coat was gone, vanished into the grey afternoon like he'd never been there at all. She should have called someone. She should have walked straight to the register, dropped everything into the lost and found box, and forgotten about it by the time she clocked out. Instead, she unfolded the note. The handwriting was small and fast, like it had been written in a hurry by someone used to writing in the dark. "There's a car in the back lot. Silver sedan, no plates you'll recognize. Everything inside it can end a network that's been running for 15 years. Trafficking, laundering, worse. I can't drive it out of this county myself. Every road I know is watched. But you grew up here. You know the roads that don't show up on any map. I need someone who can disappear into these hills without anyone noticing. I watched you for 2 weeks before I chose you. I'm sorry. Meet me at the Old Mill Road turnoff at midnight if you're willing. If you're not, throw this away and forget my face. I won't come back for the keys." There was no signature, just a single letter at the bottom, drawn like a habit rather than a choice. K. Vespera read it twice, then a third time because the first 2 times her brain had simply refused to accept what her eyes were telling her. She was 26 years old. She had worked at this diner for 6 years. Her biggest decision most days was whether to take the highway or the back road home, and even that decision was really just about which route had fewer potholes. She did not get notes from strangers about criminal networks. She did not get handed car keys like she was in some movie. And yet, she walked to the window, cup still in her hand, and looked out at the gravel lot behind the diner. Sure enough, parked crooked in the far corner, half hidden behind the dumpster, sat a silver sedan. No dealer plate, no parking sticker, nothing that marked it as belonging to anyone at all. Her manager called her name from the kitchen, something about the coffee filters needing restocking, and Vespera realized she'd been standing frozen for almost a full minute, the note crushed slightly in her fist. She thought about her apartment. Small, cold in the winter, with a landlord who never fixed the heat on time. She thought about her mother, 3 towns over, who called every Sunday to ask when Vespera was finally going to do something with her life. She thought about the 7 years since high school that had passed in a blur of double shifts and small tips and nothing ever changing. And she thought about the man in the grey coat, the way he hadn't looked at her like a waitress. He'd looked at her like she mattered, like she was dangerous in a way she'd never once considered herself to be. She slipped the keys and the GPS unit into her apron pocket before she'd even decided to. Her body moved faster than her mind, like some older, braver version of herself had been waiting years for exactly this moment. That night, after her shift ended and the diner lights clicked off one by one behind her, Vespera didn't drive home. She turned left instead of right, toward the Mill Road, her heart hammering so loud she could hear it over the engine. The GPS blinked steadily on the passenger seat, a single green dot pulsing like a heartbeat that wasn't her own. She had no idea, as she drove into the dark, that the man waiting for her at that turnoff wasn't just running from the law. He was running from his own family. And by choosing to meet him, Vespera had just made herself their target, too. The Mill Road turnoff was exactly where the note said it would be, a gravel break in the tree line, easy to miss if you didn't already know it was there. Vespera had known it since she was 12, back when she and her cousins used to ride bikes out here to skip stones at the quarry pond. She cut her headlights 100 feet out, the way she'd seen people do in movies, and rolled to a stop beside a shape she almost mistook for a boulder. It was Kaylin, leaning against a tree, arms crossed, watching the road she'd just come from instead of watching her. "You came," he said when she stepped out. He didn't sound relieved. He sounded like a man recalculating odds. "I almost didn't." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Explain the note, all of it, or I'm turning around." "There's no time for all of it." He nodded toward the silver sedan, still parked where he must have driven it earlier, waiting behind a curtain of low branches. "But I'll give you what matters. Get in and drive, and I'll talk." She should have said no. Every rational part of her, the part that paid rent on time and never missed a shift, screamed at her to get back in her Civic and go home. But there was another part of her, quieter but older, that was tired of being the version of herself who always said no. She got in the sedan. Kaylin slid into the passenger seat, and immediately his eyes went to the mirrors, then to the GPS unit clipped to the dash, then back to the road behind them. "There's a laptop bag under your seat. Don't touch it. Everything on those drives ties a shipping company to a trafficking ring that's been running product and worse through 6 states. I worked inside it. I have proof. I'm taking it to federal prosecutors in Denver. And you need a waitress to drive you there because the roads I know are watched. Cameras, informants, people paid to notice cars that don't belong." He finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw something under the careful control, something close to desperation. "You've lived here your whole life. You know roads that don't exist on any GPS but the one in your head." Vespera's hands tightened on the wheel. "You said we, back there. In the note you made it sound like a choice. This sounds like I'm your getaway driver." "You are," he said, with a bluntness that almost made her laugh. "But you're also the only reason I'll make it out of this county alive." She didn't get the chance to respond. A pair of headlights swept across the tree line behind them, too fast, too deliberate for a random driver on a back road at midnight. Kaylin's whole body went rigid. "That's not local traffic," he said quietly. "Drive, now." She didn't ask questions. She threw the sedan into gear and pulled out onto the Mill Road, gravel spitting from the tires, and merged toward the distant hum of Interstate 80, because it was the fastest way to put distance between them and whoever was back there. That turned out to be a mistake. "Pull off," Kaylin said suddenly, staring at a black SUV 2 lanes over that had matched their speed for the last mile exactly. "They're not behind us, they're beside us. That means there's a spotter on the highway itself. How would anyone even know we're on this road? Because I'm not as careful as I think I am, apparently. Pull off, now, any exit." Her pulse spiked, but her mind, trained by years of navigating these roads on autopilot, cutting through back roads to shave 5 minutes off her commute, was already working. She yanked the wheel toward an unmarked exit that most drivers never even noticed, one that dumped onto a service road behind an old quarry. "This isn't on any map," Kaylin said, gripping the door handle as the sedan bounced hard over a pothole. "It's not supposed to be." Vespera killed the headlights again, steering by memory and the pale wash of moonlight over crushed limestone. "My cousin used to work security here. This place shut down 8 years ago. There's a loop road around the pit that connects back to the highway a mile down, past where anyone's watching. Behind them, she caught a flash of headlights slowing at the exit they'd just abandoned, hesitating, searching, before continuing on the highway, exactly where they expected the sedan to still be. Kalen exhaled, long and slow, like he'd been holding his breath since the diner. "You just lost a professional tail on a road that isn't even real." "I told you, I know these hills." She kept driving, weaving the loop road with a confidence that surprised even her, dust rising behind them in a cloud that would settle long before anyone thought to check. For the first time since she'd read that note, Vespera let herself feel something other than fear. She felt useful. She felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like the life she was living actually mattered to someone. Kalen studied her from the passenger seat, something shifting behind his eyes. Not quite trust yet, but the first crack in the wall of it. "You're better at this than you should be," he said. "You picked the right waitress," she answered, and meant it as a joke, though neither of them laughed. Because somewhere behind them, the black SUV had already turned around, and whoever was inside it wasn't the kind of person who gave up after one wrong exit. The Starlight Motel wasn't the kind of place that asked questions. Vespera had passed it 100 times on drives she never meant to take, its neon sign missing the letter R, so it just read Star-Light, buzzing weakly against the dark. Kalen paid cash for a room in the back, the one with a broken parking lot light overhead, which he seemed to consider a feature rather than a flaw. Before they went inside, he pulled both their phones from her bag and his coat pocket, popped the batteries, and dropped everything into a gas station trash can 2 blocks away. "That felt dramatic," Vespera said, watching her phone, with 3 years of photos and her mother's number and every small, ordinary piece of her old life disappear under a fast food wrapper. "Dramatic keeps you alive," Kalen said. "Phones ping towers, towers tell people where you are. As of tonight, you don't exist anywhere a signal can find you." The room smelled like old carpet and bleach. Kalen laid the laptop bag on the bed and pulled out 2 hard drives, their casings scratched, one with a hairline crack along the edge, like it had survived being dropped more than once. "This is what 15 years of running gets reduced to," he said, almost to himself. 2 drives and a set of encryption keys. 15 years of what, exactly? He never actually said what you did inside this network. Vespera sat on the edge of the room's single wobbly chair, arms crossed, finally demanding the answer she'd been owed since the diner. Kalen's jaw tightened. "Logistics. I moved things, legitimate things mostly, through shipping routes my family controls. But underneath the legitimate cargo, there was always something else. People. Money that needed to disappear. I told myself for years I wasn't really part of it, that I just kept the books clean on paper. That's a lie people tell themselves so they can sleep. Your family. My family." He said it like the words tasted bad. "That's a conversation for later. Right now, I need you to look at something." He pulled the GPS unit from his coat and set it on the small table between them, thumbing through a short list of saved waypoints. The screen glowed pale blue in the dim room, and Vespera leaned in without meaning to. The second waypoint on the list wasn't labeled with coordinates like the others. It had a name. Hawks Ridge Overlook. Vespera went very still. "That's..." She stopped, started again. "That's a place I wrote about. Years ago. On a travel blog nobody read. I had maybe 40 followers, most of them my own relatives. I posted about a hike I took after high school graduation, this overlook 2 counties from here. I haven't thought about that blog in years." "I know," Kalen said quietly. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer right away, and in the silence something cold settled into Vespera's stomach, a realization arriving a few seconds ahead of the words that would confirm it. "You didn't pick me at random," she said slowly. "The diner, the exact change, the empty booth you always sat in. That wasn't the first time you'd been there, was it?" "No." Kalen finally met her eyes, and for the first time, the careful control in his face cracked all the way open. "I've been watching you for 2 weeks. Before that, I spent a month going through everything I could find, Old blog posts, forum comments, anything public that might tell me who in this region actually knew the terrain the way I needed. Not just roads, the kind of knowledge that doesn't show up on any map. Quarry access points, which farmers leave their gates unlocked, which trails wash out in rain and which ones don't. "You built a profile of me," Vespera said, her voice flat with disbelief. "From a travel blog I forgot existed. I built a profile of the person I needed to survive this. It happened to be you." He didn't look away from her, didn't flinch from how badly that admission landed. "I'm not going to apologize for being thorough. It's the only reason either of us is alive tonight instead of caught on that highway." She stood up, needing the distance, pacing the short length of the room. "So this whole thing, the note, the mystery, I watched you for 2 weeks, I'm sorry. That wasn't fate. That wasn't chance. I was a name on a list you built like a spreadsheet." "You were the best name on the list," Kaylin said. "That's not nothing." It should have made her angrier than it did, but underneath the anger was something more complicated, the unsettling knowledge that a stranger had studied her closer than most people who claimed to actually know her ever had. He knew about a hiking trail she'd forgotten she'd written about. He'd noticed things about her worth noticing. She looked back at the GPS screen, at the pin marking Hawks Ridge. Why is it on the route at all, if this is just about getting to Denver? "Because the file transfer to the prosecutor's team has security windows," Kaylin said. "Times it has to happen, remotely, when their systems are monitoring for the handshake. We have downtime between now and the next window. I thought—" He stopped, seeming to hear how it sounded before he said it out loud. "I thought it might mean something to you, going back there, under different circumstances than the last time." Vespera studied him for a long moment, the exhaustion of the night pulling at her, the strangeness of being known by a stranger settling somewhere she couldn't quite name yet. "We should sleep," she said finally. "If there's a window tomorrow, I want to be able to drive straight through it." Kaylin nodded, but as she lay down fully clothed on top of the motel bedspread, staring at a water-stained ceiling, she couldn't stop turning it over. The unsettling comfort of being chosen so deliberately, and the fear of what else he might already know about her that she hadn't yet found out herself. Outside, a car passed slowly on the road beyond the motel lot, its headlights sweeping once across the curtains before continuing on into the dark. Morning came grey and thin, the kind of light that made everything look like it hadn't decided whether it was day yet. Vespera woke to the sound of Kaylin already moving, packing the hard drives back into the bag, checking the GPS screen with the focused stillness of someone who'd barely slept. "We need to be past the Ohio line by noon," he said, not looking up. "There's a network of covered bridges about 90 minutes from here. Old farm routes, no highway cameras, no toll records. It'll cost us time, but it keeps us invisible." "You say that like it's simple." Vespera sat up, rubbing the stiffness out of her neck. "Yesterday you said the whole point of me was knowing roads that don't exist on maps. Now you're steering by bridges instead." "I know the general region. You'll know the roads themselves once we're in it." He finally looked at her, and something like an apology passed behind his eyes. "I need you to trust that I'm not making this up as I go." "You absolutely are making this up as you go," she said, but she was already pulling her shoes on. The drive into Ohio unspooled through flat farmland cut by narrow rivers, the kind of scenery that looked identical mile after mile until it suddenly didn't. The first covered bridge appeared like something out of an old postcard. Redwood, white trim, dark and hollow inside, like the mouth of a tunnel. Vespera slowed the sedan and eased through it, the tires thudding hollow over old planks. "There are 6 more like this in a 15-mile stretch," Kaylin said, watching the GPS. "If we cross them all, we stay off every road with a traffic camera." They made it through 4 without incident. It was on the 5th, a bridge tucked into a bend where the road narrowed to barely more than a single lane, that Vespera caught movement in the side mirror, a dark pickup truck closing fast, coming from a farm access road that shouldn't have had anyone on it this early. "Kaylin." He turned just as the truck's front bumper clipped their rear panel, hard enough to send the sedan skidding sideways across the loose gravel at the bridge's mouth. Hold the wheel steady! Kalen's voice cut sharp through the chaos. Vespera fought the sedan straight, tires screaming, as the truck swung wide for a second hit. This time Kalen reached over without asking, one hand steadying the wheel alongside hers, timing a hard brake that let the truck overshoot and slide past them onto the bridge itself. "Go left, off the road, now," he ordered. "There's nothing to the left but a field. Trust me." She yanked the wheel. The sedan lurched off the gravel road and onto rutted farmland, jolting so hard Vespera bit her tongue. In the mirror, the truck was already reversing, trying to correct, but the narrow bridge gave it nowhere to turn around quickly. "There!" Kalen pointed toward a weathered grey shape ahead, half collapsed at one corner but still standing, an old hay barn set back from a farmhouse that looked long abandoned. "If we can get inside before they clear the bridge, they lose visual." Vespera aimed for the barn's open side, praying the door was wide enough, and the sedan clipped through with inches to spare, scraping wood on both mirrors. She killed the engine instantly, plunging them into dusty half-darkness, the only sound their own ragged breathing and, somewhere above, the soft shuffle of pigeons disturbed from the rafters. Through a gap in the barn's siding, they watched the truck finally clear the bridge, slow at the fork where the field road split off, and idle there for a long, agonizing 30 seconds. "They know we went somewhere around here," Kalen whispered. "They just don't know where." The truck crept forward another 20 feet, then stopped completely. Vespera's heart hammered so loud she was sure it could be heard outside the barn walls. Then, finally, the truck accelerated, continuing down the main road, engine noise fading into the flat quiet of the farmland. Neither of them moved for a full minute after the sound disappeared. "That truck wasn't random," Vespera said finally, breaking the silence. "Nobody drives a dead-end farm road that fast unless they're looking for something specific." "They found the sedan," Kalen said grimly, stepping out to inspect the damage, a long scrape down the passenger side, one mirror hanging by a wire. "Which means someone's tracking more than just cameras. Someone gave them a general location." "How? We ditched the phones." Kalen's face went carefully blank, in a way Vespera was starting to recognize as him hiding something. "There are other ways to track a vehicle. I should have thought of it sooner." "What kind of other ways?" He crouched by the sedan's rear wheel well, running his fingers along the underside until he found it. A small black disc, no bigger than a coin, magnetized to the frame. "A tracker." He held it up between two fingers, something like fury flashing across his face. "Which means whoever put it there had access to this car before I ever picked it up. Which means this wasn't syndicate soldiers randomly patrolling farmland. This was planned. Someone on the inside knew exactly which car I'd take." Vespera felt the cold drop in her stomach again, the same one from the motel room the night before. "You said you trusted the people who gave you this car." "I did." Kalen crushed the tracker under his boot heel, the small plastic crack unnervingly loud in the barn's silence. "Which means I need to figure out who I actually trust before we go any further. Because right now, the answer might be nobody but you." Outside, the morning had gone fully grey, clouds thickening over the flat Ohio fields, and somewhere beyond them, whoever had planted that tracker was still out there, recalibrating and starting the search all over again. The industrial warehouse on the outskirts of a nowhere Indiana suburb looked exactly like every other abandoned building on the block. Broken windows, faded loading dock numbers, a chain-link fence with a gap cut through it that had clearly been used more than once. Kalen navigated them through the gap on foot after hiding the damaged sedan 2 streets over under a highway overpass, tarp and all, courtesy of supplies he pulled from the trunk like he'd planned for this exact scenario. "You keep tarps and spare plates in the trunk of a car you supposedly picked at random," Vespera said, watching him work in the dim warehouse light. "I plan for contingencies." He didn't look up from the license plate he was swapping, bolts spinning loose under a small wrench. "That's different from trusting the people who gave me the contingencies." Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty, rusted shelving, a stripped forklift, dust thick enough to taste. But in one corner, someone had clearly been using it recently. a folding table, 2 cots, a case of bottled water, and a battered duffel bag Kalen went straight for like he already knew what was inside. "This is a safe house," Vespera said slowly. "You have safe houses." Had, past tense, as of finding that tracker. He pulled a fresh set of plates from the duffel and checked them against a printed sheet. "This one was arranged before I left, through someone I thought I could still trust. Now I don't know if that's true." Vespera sat on the edge of one of the cots, exhaustion finally catching up to the adrenaline of the last 2 days. "I need you to actually explain this to me. All of it, not fragments. Who are you running from, and what happens when we get to Denver?" Kalen stopped working. For a long moment he just stood there, hands braced on the folding table, like he was deciding how much of the truth she could carry. "My family runs the network," he said finally. "Not distantly involved, runs it. My father built the shipping company 40 years ago as a legitimate business, and somewhere in the last 20, it became the shell for something much worse. Trafficking, laundering money for 3 other syndicates. I was groomed to take it over since I was old enough to understand what a ledger was." "And you just decided to burn it all down?" "I decided I was done being someone I couldn't live with." His voice had an edge now, something raw under the careful control he usually wore like armor. "I have proof. Real proof. Financial trails, shipment manifests, names. Enough to end my father's operation and 3 others tied to it. I'm not selling this to a rival network. I'm not blackmailing anyone for money. I'm handing it directly to federal prosecutors in Denver, in person, because it's the only way to guarantee it actually gets used instead of buried." "You're turning in your own family." "My own family would have had me gone the moment they suspected I was capable of doubt." Kalen's jaw tightened. "I've watched them do it to people less dangerous than what I'm carrying in that bag. I'm not doing this for revenge, if that's what you're wondering. I'm doing it because I want to exist as someone who isn't complicit anymore. Free or dead. Those are genuinely the only 2 outcomes left for me." Vespera absorbed that in silence, watching him in the dim warehouse light, the exhaustion and fear stripped down to something closer to conviction. It should have terrified her more than it did. "And me?" she asked. "What happens to me when this is over? I'm not federal witness material. I'm not part of your family's business. I'm a waitress who drove a stranger's car because I was tired of my life staying the same." "You get full protection," Kalen said immediately. "That was part of the arrangement before I ever wrote that note. The prosecutor's office knows there's a second person involved, someone providing logistical support. You'll have immunity, protection, whatever you need to disappear safely if that's what you want, or to go back to your life completely untouched if that's what you'd rather have." "You planned my exit before you even met me." "I plan everything." Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile, but close. "It's the only skill my family ever actually gave me that turned out to be useful for something good." She wanted to believe him. That was the unsettling part. Not that his story sounded false, but that some part of her, some reckless and starving part that had spent 6 years waiting on tables and watching other people's lives happen around her, wanted so badly for this to be real that she wasn't sure she could trust her own judgment anymore. "The tracker," she said instead, circling back to the thing that still didn't sit right. "If someone on the inside knew which car you'd take, that means someone close to you, someone who helped arrange all this, might already know we're heading to Indiana, might know about this exact warehouse." Kalen's expression sharpened, like he'd been avoiding that thought and she'd just dragged it into the light. "The safe house was arranged by exactly one person, someone I've trusted." "Then either that person betrayed you," Vespera said quietly, "or someone got to them." Kalen didn't answer. He just stared at the duffel bag on the table, at the hard drives inside it, holding 15 years of a life he was trying to burn down, and for the first time since the diner, Vespera saw real fear cross his face. Not fear of the syndicate outside, but fear of the one person he'd never once considered a threat. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere near the warehouse's front lot, faint but unmistakable in the after-midnight silence. Kalen went rigid. "We need to move. Now." The car door slam turned out to be nothing more than a teenager sneaking out to smoke behind the building next door, a fact they only confirmed after 20 of the longest minutes of Vespera's life, crouched behind a stripped forklift with Kaylin's hand pressed flat against her shoulder, both of them barely breathing. By the time they were certain, adrenaline had burned through her so completely that the drive out of Indiana passed in a kind of numb, exhausted blur. They crossed into Illinois as the sun broke weakly through the clouds, and for the first time in days, the GPS gave them something other than a warning. Mandatory hold, 4 hours. Data verification in progress. What does that mean? Vespera asked, easing the sedan onto a quiet riverside road. It means the prosecutor's team needs a clean window to remotely verify the drive signatures before we get close enough to hand them over in person. They can't risk us walking the physical drives into a compromised handoff point. Kaylin studied the screen, some of the tension finally easing from his shoulders. 4 hours where we don't have to be running. The GPS routed them to a historic riverfront park on the edge of a small river town, the kind of place with worn benches and a walking trail that hugged the water, mostly empty on a weekday afternoon. Vespera parked the damaged sedan behind a stand of trees, out of sight from the main road, and for the first time in 3 days, neither of them moved with urgency. "This is it, isn't it?" she said, stepping out into air that smelled like river water and cut grass. "The second place from my blog." Kaylin nodded, watching her reaction carefully. "You wrote about it after a trip with your cousins. You said the water made you feel like you were somewhere that mattered, even though nothing about the town itself was special." "I can't believe you memorized my old travel blog like scripture." "I read it more times than I'll admit," he said, and there was something almost boyish in the honesty of it, a crack in the composed exterior she'd only seen flicker at the edges before now. They found a bench near the water, and Kaylin, to her surprise, pulled a paper bag from the trunk before they sat. Bread, cheese, a couple of apples, bought at a gas station 2 states back and forgotten until now. "This is the least dramatic meal of my life," Vespera said, tearing a piece of bread. "Considering everything else that's happened this week." "I'll take boring. Boring means alive." Kaylin settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, watching the slow current of the river instead of scanning the tree line for once. "Tell me something true. Not about the syndicate, not about the drive. Something about you nobody's asked you in years." Vespera turned the question over, surprised by how hard it was to answer. "I wanted to travel. Actually travel. Not just write about hiking trails 2 counties over and pretend it counted. I had a plan, right after high school, save up, go somewhere real. Then my dad got sick, and the plan turned into picking up extra shifts, and somewhere in there the plan just stopped being a plan. It became something I used to want." "What happened to your dad?" "He's fine now. Better than fine. But by the time he was fine, I'd been at that diner 5 years, and starting over felt harder than staying." She looked at him, unflinching despite the vulnerability in it. "Your turn. Something true nobody's asked." Kaylin was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Vespera thought he might deflect the way he had every other time she'd pushed too close to something real. "Instead," he said, "I used to think I was a coward for not doing this sooner. I knew what my family was for years before I ever started collecting proof. I told myself I was being careful, strategic, waiting for the right moment. Really, I was just scared, and I let that fear cost people things I can't take back." "What kind of things?" "A man who worked shipping logistics under me disappeared 18 months ago. Officially, he relocated. I knew what actually happened, and I said nothing, because saying something meant admitting what I already knew about everyone around me." His voice had gone quiet, stripped of its usual control. "You asked me back at the motel why I chose you. Part of the truth is that I needed someone competent, but part of it is that I was tired of being surrounded by people who already knew and said nothing. I wanted, just once, to be around someone who didn't yet know how ugly things could get and might actually be brave enough to still choose to help." The confession sat between them, heavier than anything that had happened on the road so far, heavier than the chase, the crash, the tracker crushed underfoot in an Ohio barn. Vespera found herself reaching for his hand without entirely deciding to, and he let her, their fingers threading together on the worn wooden bench while the river moved past them, indifferent and steady. "We're not the same as we were 3 days ago," she said quietly. "No," Kaelin agreed. "We're not." Neither of them moved to close the distance further, but something had shifted, undeniable and quiet, settling into the space between them like the last color draining from the sky. For 4 hours, there was no syndicate, no GPS countdown, no tracker hidden in a wheel well. Just a river, a bench, and 2 people who had started this journey as strangers and were no longer sure that word applied. When the GPS finally chimed, signaling the hold had lifted, neither of them moved right away, reluctant, for the first time since the diner, to let the world catch back up to them. The gas station sat alone at a crossroads in eastern Iowa, one of those places with a single working pump and a hand-painted sign advertising bait and ammunition in the same faded letters. Vespera pulled in with the fuel gauge blinking red, the sedan running on fumes after the long push out of Illinois. "In and out," Kaelin said, scanning the empty lot. 5 minutes. It should have been 5 minutes. It became something else the moment the man behind the counter glanced up at them, did a visible double-take, and reached for the landline phone the second Vespera's back was turned. She caught it in the reflection of the drink cooler glass, the man's mouth moving fast, eyes flicking toward the window where the sedan sat at the pump. By the time she got back outside, Kaelin was already pulling the nozzle free, tension radiating off him. "We have a problem," she said quietly, sliding into the driver's seat. "The clerk just made a call. He recognized something. The car, maybe. Or us." Kaelin's face went hard. "Local informants. My family pays people in towns like this to watch for exactly this kind of thing. Anyone traveling off the main roads, anyone who doesn't fit. Drive. Now." She pulled out fast, gravel spitting behind them, and that was when she saw it in the mirror. Not a car this time, but a slow, deliberate confirmation. 2 vehicles idling at the crossroads a half-mile back, positioned like they'd been waiting for a signal rather than randomly passing through. "They're not chasing us yet," Vespera said. "They're boxing us in, watching which direction we commit to." "Local traffic cameras feed straight to county systems out here," Kaelin said, checking the GPS. "If they've got someone monitoring those feeds, they'll know our exact route within minutes, no matter which way you turn." Vespera's mind raced through the geography she'd half-memorized from the GPS screen over the last 3 days. Highway, county road, the thin grey lines of farm access routes that wouldn't show up on any traffic camera because they weren't real roads at all, just tractor paths cut between fields. "There's a way through the cornfields," she said, "but we won't make it on the fuel we've got. That gauge has been on empty for the last 10 miles. Then we find fuel that isn't tied to a card, a camera, or a clerk with a phone." They found it, a mile down an unmarked lane, an old tractor, rusted and half-swallowed by weeds, sitting abandoned at the edge of a field beside a leaning equipment shed. Vespera was out of the sedan before Kaelin finished asking what she was doing, already prying open the shed door to search for a hose, a container, anything. "You know how to do this?" Kaelin asked, watching her work with a mix of alarm and something close to admiration. "My uncle ran a repair shop. I spent every summer from age 12 to 16 handing him tools and learning more than I ever wanted to about engines." She found a length of rubber hose coiled on a nail and a rusted 5-gallon can half full of old gas that she dumped out entirely, needing it clean. Commercial diesel won't run right in a gas engine long term, but the sedan's got a dual fuel line workaround if I bypass the secondary filter, enough to get us 30-40 miles on farm fuel alone. That's not something a normal person just knows. "Nothing about the last 4 days has been normal," she said, already elbow-deep under the sedan's hood, disconnecting a line with hands that moved faster than her nerves felt. Kaelin held the flashlight, watched the road, and said nothing else, letting her work. Fuel siphoned, line rerouted, engine coughing once before catching, they pulled away from the tractor and cut straight into the cornfields on a path barely wide enough for the sedan's width, stalks slapping against the windows on both sides like static. Behind them, faint through the rows, came the sound of engines slowing at the crossroads, confused by a vehicle that had simply vanished from every camera feed at once. "How far to the next real road?" Kaylin asked, gripping the door handle as the sedan bucked over uneven furrows. 4 miles, if the field hasn't been replanted since the last time I drove past here with my cousin. Vespera's jaw was tight with concentration, eyes fixed on a barely visible tree line ahead that marked where the field ended. "If it has, we're improvising." It hadn't been replanted. The sedan burst out of the corn onto a gravel county road a mile from where they'd need to rejoin the highway, dust and stalks scattered across the hood, both of them breathing hard from adrenaline rather than exertion. Kaylin sat back against the seat, staring at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the careful calculation of a man managing contingencies, but something closer to genuine astonishment. "You said you were tired of your life staying the same," he said quietly. "I don't think you have any idea yet how much has already changed." Vespera didn't answer right away, hands still faintly trembling on the wheel from the adrenaline, the smell of diesel and cornstalks thick in the car. Somewhere behind them, the crossroads and the clerk and the local informant faded into distance, but she knew, with a certainty that settled cold in her stomach, that word would already be moving ahead of them now, toward whoever was waiting closer to Denver, warning them that the waitress from the diner was far more dangerous than anyone had accounted for. The Loess Hills rose up out of the flat Iowa farmland like something out of place, steep, wind-carved ridges that looked more like they belonged out west than in the middle of corn country. Kaylin had pushed for one more stretch of driving before stopping, but by the time they reached the scenic byway winding along the ridgeline, even he couldn't argue against pulling over. Vespera's hands hadn't stopped shaking properly since the cornfield, and the sedan, running rough on the last of the siphoned diesel, needed rest as much as they did. They found a turnout near the top, a gravel overlook with a rusted guardrail and a view that stretched out gold and endless in the fading light. Miles of hills folding into each other, no roads, no headlights, no sign of anyone at all. "We shouldn't stop this long," Kaylin said, but he was already sitting on the hood, watching the sun drop toward the horizon, like a man who'd stopped believing his own warning. "We've been running for 4 days straight." Vespera climbed up beside him, the metal still warm from the engine underneath. "Even you have a limit." "I used to think I didn't." He said it quietly, watching the light change over the hills. "That was the thing my father valued most about me. No limit, no hesitation. I used to be proud of that. And now? Now I think it just meant I'd learned to stop noticing when I was braking." Kaylin exhaled, and for the first time since the diner, something in his posture actually let go. Not fully, but enough that Vespera could see, underneath all the careful calculation, an exhaustion that went bone deep. "I was 11 the first time my father took me on a shipment run. I didn't understand what I was looking at. By 14, I understood exactly what I was looking at, and by 16, I'd learned not to ask questions, because the one time I did, a man I liked stopped showing up to work the following week." "You were little." "I was old enough to know better before I let myself stop knowing better." His voice had an edge of old guilt in it, worn smooth from years of carrying it. "I told myself for a decade that I didn't have a choice. Family legacy, obligation, whatever word made it easier to swallow. The truth is I had a choice every single day, and I kept choosing the easier one, until the day I finally didn't." Vespera watched him, the sun catching gold across the side of his face, and felt something in her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "What changed?" "You want to know the honest answer?" He looked at her directly. "I watched a shipment manifest come through with a name on it I recognized. Someone's daughter, 16 years old, listed like cargo instead of a person. I'd seen worse things in the ledgers before that. I don't know why that name was the one that finally broke something in me. But it was. I started collecting proof that same week. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It settled between them like something earned, the kind of quiet that only came after real honesty.
I have a confession too, Vespera said finally. Something I haven't told you, or really told anyone.
Kaylin turned to face her fully. Go on.
I'm scared to leave.
The words came out smaller than she meant them to, more vulnerable than the 4 days of driving through danger had made her feel.
Not scared of the syndicate, not really. I mean, I'm terrified of that too, obviously. But underneath it, I'm scared of what happens after Denver. If we survive this, if everything goes the way you say it will, I don't actually know how to be a person who left. I've never left. I grew up 20 minutes from that diner. My whole identity is built around staying.
And now you've driven 4 states in 3 days, outrun a syndicate twice, and rerouted diesel through a gas engine with tools from an abandoned shed.
Which terrifies me more than anything else this week, honestly.
She laughed, a little shakily, surprising herself, because it means the version of me that stayed home for 6 years wasn't actually who I was. She was just who I let myself become, because leaving felt too big to imagine. And now, I don't know how to go back to being her, even if I wanted to.
Then don't, Kaylin said simply. Go back to being her, I mean. Don't. That's easy for you to say. You've never been the version of yourself who stays.
No, he admitted. I've been the version of myself who runs and calls it strategy, which might be worse. He reached over, tucking a strand of hair back from her face, with a gentleness that startled her, given everything else his hands had done in the last 4 days, steadying a wheel through a chase, crushing a tracker underfoot, disconnecting a fuel line in the dark.
For what it's worth, I think the version of you sitting on this hood right now is exactly who you were always going to become. This just forced it out sooner than it might have happened otherwise.
Vespera didn't answer with words. She leaned into him instead, resting her head against his shoulder as the last light drained gold, then pink, then a deep, unbroken blue over the ridges. Both of them quiet in a way that felt less like exhaustion now and more like peace. Neither of them saw the small aircraft crossing high overhead in the darkening sky, circling once before banking east, toward Colorado, toward the mountain pass they hadn't yet reached, carrying word to people who had been waiting far more patiently than anyone chasing them by car ever could. The mountain pass in eastern Colorado climbed fast after the flatlands, the road narrowing into switchbacks with nothing but a low concrete guardrail between the sedan and a drop that fell away into pine and shadow.
Vespera had been driving for 6 hours straight, the GPS counting down the final stretch to the federal district line in miles that felt both impossibly close and impossibly far.
We're almost there, Kaylin said, watching the screen. 40 minutes to the district boundary. Once we cross it, local jurisdiction doesn't apply the same way. It gets harder for them to touch us.
You keep saying harder, not impossible.
I don't lie to you anymore, he said. Not even the comfortable kind. The black truck appeared behind them without warning, coming out of a scenic pull-off they'd passed 2 minutes earlier, closing the distance far too fast for a vehicle that size on a road this steep. Vespera caught it in the mirror and felt her stomach drop before her mind even finished processing what she was seeing.
Kaylin.
I see it. His voice had gone flat, stripped of anything but focus. That's not a spotter, that's the enforcer. My father only sends him when he's stopped caring about being careful. The truck closed the gap in seconds, its front bumper, reinforced, she realized now, built for exactly this, clipping their rear panel hard enough to send the sedan skidding toward the guardrail. Metal screamed against concrete. Vespera fought the wheel, tires losing purchase on the narrow shoulder, the drop beyond the rail suddenly, terrifyingly close. Hold the line, don't overcorrect, Kaylin said, hands braced against the dash, watching the mirror instead of the road ahead, timing something only he could see. He's going to hit us again on the next straightaway. When he does, brake hard and let him overshoot. That's a truck ramp up ahead. I know. For the first time, Kaylin's voice carried something like grim satisfaction.
That's exactly what I'm counting on.
The second hit came exactly as he predicted, the truck's reinforced bumper slamming into their rear quarter panel with bone-jarring force. Vespera stamped the brake the instant Kaylin's hand closed over hers on the wheel, both of them wrenching it hard right in perfect, terrified synchronization. The truck, unable to correct in time, shot past them at full speed, driver overcorrecting toward the runaway truck ramp cut into the mountainside, the kind built for exactly this, for vehicles that had lost the ability to stop. The truck plowed into the gravel arrestor bed, sand and dust exploding upward, its momentum finally dying in a grinding, shuddering halt 50 yards up the ramp. "We did it," Vespera breathed, disbelief cracking through the terror. "We actually—" The sedan lurched. Steam hissed violently from beneath the hood, a high metallic shriek filling the cabin as the temperature gauge spiked into the red and stayed there. "Radiator," Kaylin said grimly, already twisting to look behind them at the truck, its driver's door beginning to open. "The collision must have cracked it. We're not driving this any further." "How far to the district line?" On foot, following the ridge instead of the road. Kaylin was already grabbing the duffel bag, checking the hard drives were secure, moving with the fast, controlled urgency of a man who had clearly rehearsed this exact contingency in his mind more than once. "Maybe 2 miles. Rough terrain. We don't have a choice." They abandoned the sedan on the shoulder, steam still pouring from beneath the hood, and cut up into the tree line just as the enforcer's driver climbed free of the wrecked truck below, a big man, moving with the deliberate calm of someone used to violence, already scanning the ridge for exactly what he'd find. "Move," Kaylin said, and they ran. The terrain fought them at every step. Loose scree, thick brush, roots hidden under pine needles that caught at Vespera's ankles more than once. Behind them, she could hear the enforcer moving too, not fast but relentless, the kind of pursuit that didn't need speed because it had patience instead. "He's not gaining on us," Vespera gasped, ducking under a low branch. "Why isn't he gaining?" "Because he doesn't need to." Kaylin's breathing was ragged, but his voice stayed controlled. "He knows this terrain funnels toward the district checkpoint eventually. He's herding us, not chasing us, waiting for a choke point." "Then we don't take the obvious path." Vespera cut sideways without waiting for agreement, angling down through a break in the tree line toward a dry creek bed she'd glimpsed from higher ground. Not the route the terrain suggested, but the one that made sense to someone who'd spent a life reading landscapes instead of maps. Kaylin followed without question, trusting her instincts the way he had every time they'd mattered most. The creek bed cut steep and fast toward a narrow gap between 2 rock formations, barely wide enough for a person to pass through sideways. They squeezed through, just as the enforcer's shape appeared on the ridge above, momentarily confused by a vanished trail, exactly the way the syndicate car had been confused by a cornfield 2 states back. On the other side of the gap, the ground leveled out into a gravel access road, and beyond it, impossibly, finally, a chain-link fence marked with a small federal boundary sign, half hidden by scrub brush but unmistakable. "That's it," Kaylin said, disbelief cracking through his exhaustion. "That's the district line." They crossed it together, collapsing against the fence on the other side, lungs burning, hands shaking, the duffel bag still miraculously secure over Kaylin's shoulder. Behind them, on the ridge, the enforcer's shape appeared once more at the tree line, and then, after a long, tense moment, simply turned and disappeared back the way he'd come, unwilling or unable to follow them across a line his employer's reach didn't extend past. "We're not safe yet," Kaylin said, still catching his breath. "But we're close. Closer than we've ever been." Vespera looked back at the mountains behind them, the wrecked truck and the abandoned sedan somewhere below in the fading light, and felt, for the first time in 4 days, something that might have actually been hope. The Federal District building rose out of downtown Denver like something built to be unshakable. Gray stone, reinforced glass, American flags hanging still in windless morning air. Vespera and Kaylin had spent the night in a motel just inside the district line, scraped, bruised, and running on adrenaline fumes, waiting for the courier Kaylin's contact promised would meet them at dawn. The courier never came. "Something's wrong," Kalen said, checking his watch for the fourth time in 10 minutes, standing at the edge of a small public park across from the federal building. He should have been here 20 minutes ago. Maybe he's just late. He's never late. That's the entire point of using someone like him. Kalen's jaw tightened, the same careful blankness from the Ohio barn settling over his face. This is the same contact who arranged the Indiana safe house. Vespera felt the cold drop in her stomach return. The one you said you'd trusted. Marcus. Kalen said the name like it cost him something. I've known him 19 years. He's the only person outside this bag who knows exactly what route we've taken, exactly when we'd arrive here. Then we don't wait for him. They walked the 2 blocks to the federal building directly, the duffel bag heavy on Kalen's shoulder, both of them scanning every parked car, every pedestrian, every window that could hide a rifle scope. At the security checkpoint, a woman in a dark blazer stepped forward before either of them reached the metal detector, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, a federal ID clipped to her jacket. "Kalen Voss," she said quietly. "I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Reyes. You're early. We weren't expecting the physical handoff until your courier confirmed clearance." "Our courier didn't show," Kalen said. "Marcus Feld. He arranged our route into the district." Something shifted in Reyes's expression. Not surprise exactly, but confirmation of something she'd already suspected. Marcus Feld was detained 40 minutes ago outside this building. He was carrying a tracking device matched to a vehicle registered to your father's company. We believe he's been feeding your location to the syndicate since Indiana. Vespera's breath caught. Kalen went very still, the last piece of a puzzle he'd clearly been dreading finally snapping into place. "He was going to hand me over," Kalen said, quiet and flat. "The safe house, the tracker on the sedan, all of it." "We don't know his full intentions yet," Reyes said carefully. "But we know he was compromised, and we know you made it here without him, which frankly says more about the two of you than anything in your file." Her eyes moved to Vespera with open assessment. "You must be the logistical support mentioned in the prosecutor's briefing." "Vespera," she said, finding her voice. "I'm the one who knew the backroads. You're the reason this case is walking through my door instead of ending in a ditch somewhere in Ohio," Reyes said, and there was something almost like respect in it. "Come inside. Let's finish this." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of secure rooms, evidence intake forms, and careful verification. Technicians confirming drive signatures against the remote check performed back in Illinois, agents documenting the hard drive's chain of custody, with a precision that made the entire chaotic journey feel, for the first time, like it might actually matter to someone beyond the two of them. Kalen sat across from Reyes in a windowless room, laying out the master encryption keys with hands that had stopped shaking somewhere around the second hour. "This gives you everything," he said. "Every shipment, every account, every name tied to my father's operation and the 3 networks connected to it. 15 years of records." "This is more than enough to dismantle the entire structure," Reyes confirmed, scanning a summary on her tablet, something like disbelief crossing her professional composure. "We're talking racketeering charges reaching into 3 states, human trafficking counts, money laundering going back over a decade. This is the kind of case that ends careers, theirs, not ours." "What happens to me?" "Full federal immunity, as agreed, contingent on your continued cooperation through prosecution." Reyes looked up from the tablet. "And to Vespera, full legal protection, immunity from any charges related to interstate transport, and witness protection services if she wants them. Your father's organization has resources, Mr. Voss. We take retaliation risk seriously." Vespera, sitting quietly beside Kalen through all of it, finally spoke. "What about Marcus?" "He's cooperating," Reyes said. Whether that was fear of prosecution or fear of the syndicate discovering he'd been caught, we don't know yet. But his testimony corroborates most of what's on these drives independently. It strengthens the case. Kalen absorbed that with a complicated expression, betrayal and something almost like relief tangled together. The knowledge that even the friend who'd nearly gotten them finished had, in the end, still handed the prosecution one more nail for the coffin he'd built for his own family. By late afternoon, under the watchful presence of armed federal agents, Kalen signed the final documents dissolving any legal claim his family's company held over him, formally severing every tie that had bound him to the syndicate since birth. Reyes shook both their hands with a formality that felt almost surreal after 4 days of running, crashing, and hiding. "It's done," Kalen said, once they stood outside the building again, the Denver afternoon bright and ordinary around them, cars passing, people walking dogs, none of them aware that the two exhausted, disheveled people standing on the sidewalk had just ended a criminal empire that had operated for 15 years. "It's done," Vespera echoed, and the words felt strange in her mouth, too small for everything they'd survived to reach this exact moment. Kalen turned to her, the careful control finally, fully gone from his face, replaced by something raw and unguarded that she hadn't seen from him even in their quietest moments on the road. "I don't know what happens next, for either of us. I've spent my entire adult life planning contingencies, and I genuinely don't have one for this." "Good," Vespera said, surprising herself with how certain it sounded. "Neither do I. Maybe that's the point." Above them, the flags outside the federal building shifted finally in a light afternoon breeze, and for the first time since a $0 tip had upended her entire life, Vespera let herself simply stand still, unhurried, unafraid, with nowhere left to run to. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel drive outside Estes Park, tucked against a slope of pine and aspen that turned gold at the edges as autumn crept in early at this elevation. 3 weeks had passed since Denver, 3 weeks of debriefings, safe houses that were actually safe, and a slow, careful unwinding of the fear that had lived in Vespera's chest since a stranger left exact change and a folded note under a diner plate. She sat on the porch steps now, coffee cooling in her hands, watching the light change over the ridge the way she used to watch it change over the quarry pond. Except now, the stillness didn't feel like waiting for something. It felt like arriving somewhere. The screen door creaked behind her, and Kalen stepped out, 2 mugs replaced by the one she already held, and a folded newspaper tucked under his arm. He sat beside her without a word, the easy quiet between them, the kind that had taken 4 days of chaos and 3 weeks of safety to finally earn. "It made the front page again," he said, setting the paper down. "Federal prosecutors dismantle multi-state trafficking network," the headline read, a photo of the Denver Federal Building beneath it. "Reyes called this morning. Marcus's testimony held up. My father's arraignment is set for next month. How do you feel about that?" Kalen considered it honestly, the way he'd learned to over these 3 weeks, no longer hiding behind careful calculation when a real answer was harder but truer. "Lighter than I expected. I thought turning him in would feel like losing something. Mostly it just feels like I finally stopped carrying it." "And Marcus? Reduced sentence, relocation, a life that isn't this one anymore." Something complicated crossed his face. Not forgiveness exactly, but the kind of understanding that came from knowing fear could make people do things they'd otherwise never choose. "I don't know if I'll ever trust him again, but I understand him better than I want to." Vespera nodded, letting the silence stretch comfortably before she asked the question that had been sitting quietly at the edge of every conversation since they'd arrived here. "What do you actually want now, Kalen? Not the version of you that had a plan for every contingency. Just you." He was quiet for a long moment, turning the mug in his hands, watching the steam curl into the cool mountain air. "I spent my whole life being useful to something I hated. Then I spent 4 days being useful to something that terrified me, but felt right for the first time. I don't actually know how to want things just for myself. I'm still learning." "That makes 2 of us." She smiled, small and honest. "I spent 6 years telling myself staying was safe, and it turns out safe and stuck were the same word wearing a disguise. I don't know what I want long-term either, but I know I don't want to go back to being the version of me that never asked." So what do we do with that? Kaylin asked, and there was something almost nervous in it. A vulnerability that felt strange coming from a man who had once talked her through a mountain pass ambush without his voice shaking once. Vespera reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something she'd been carrying since that morning. A set of car keys, worn but familiar, the ring slightly rusted from years of use. These are mine, my old Civic back at my mother's place in Pennsylvania. I called her last week, told her I might not be coming back to the diner. That's a big step. It's the smallest step I've taken all month, considering everything else. She laughed, and it came out lighter than she expected. I'm not scared of leaving anymore. I think I proved that to myself somewhere between a covered bridge and a cornfield. Kaylin reached into his own jacket then and produced something that made her breath catch. A different set of keys, sleek and new, attached to nothing she recognized. I bought a car. A real one, clean title, nothing borrowed or arranged through anyone with a hidden agenda. No hidden trackers, no contingencies I haven't told you about. Just a car. For what? For whatever comes next, he said, and the careful control was gone entirely now, replaced by something open and a little afraid and entirely genuine. I don't have a plan this time. For the first time in my life, I actually don't. I just know I don't want to figure it out without you. Not as someone I chose off a list, not as logistical support, as someone I actually choose, every day, the way you chose to walk out of that diner and get in a stranger's car. Vespera set her coffee down on the porch step, and this time, when she leaned toward him, there was no fear underneath it, no uncertainty about what she was reaching for. The kiss was quiet and unhurried, nothing like the desperate, adrenaline-soaked days that had brought them here. Just two people who had run 4 states, outrun a syndicate, crossed a federal line, and somehow found something worth staying for on the other side of all of it. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was dropping fully behind the ridge, gold fading into a soft, endless blue. Equal partners, Kaylin said quietly, echoing something he'd promised her back on a ridge in Iowa, in a different kind of darkness. No lists, no plans, just wherever the road actually takes us. Wherever it takes us, Vespera agreed, and picked up the new set of keys from his open palm. They walked to the car together as the last light faded over the mountains, two people who had started as a stranger and a waitress, a folded note and a $0 tip, and had somehow, impossibly, found their way to something neither of them had dared to plan for. A future entirely their own, chosen freely, with nowhere left to run and nothing left to hide.